Coastal North Carolina is rich in maritime heritage. Thousands of shipwrecks have sunk in these waters over the last 400 years. While many of these shipwrecks are found far offshore, some can be easily reached and enjoyed by swimmers, divers, and snorkelers. One such wreck can be found just a few hundred yards off the shores of Nags Head, North Carolina. The USS Huron, an iron sloop-rigged steamer, lays to rest in only 20 feet of water, and an easy paddle or swim from shore rewards visitors with a glimpse into the maritime past of coastal North Carolina.
It's a nearshore wreck. It's only about 300 yards off the beach, so it's an easy swim out to the wreck. So you can spend lots of time scuba diving on it, and you can explore every nook and cranny and get to touch and feel things and look around. If you're a diver, you want to be able to go out and touch and feel the different types of vessels, as many as you possibly can. It's one of those things that you put in your bag and say, yeah, this was the one I want to drive on. It's like the Huron is like the U-85. If you're a diver, you want to go dive on the U-85. It just gives you that feeling of, I've gone back and been able to go out and see something in history that has been a prominent feature of where our country was and where it has gone. A lot of history, a lot of stories, a lot of different things that come to mind with that vessel. It was our transitioning into the steam era for the Huron and her sister ships. So it was still a sailing vessel, but it had a steam engine. Dare County has a great deal of history to it. The Huron is part of that. It certainly is not the significance of the Wright brothers that we always look at, or the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, but in its own world, it had an unmistakable significance to the coming of the Lifesaving Service.
At 1:00 a.m. on November 24, 1877, the USS Huron ran aground 250 yards off the shores of Nags Head, North Carolina. Dense fog, heavy seas, and strong winds made navigation difficult for Commander Ryan, who set a course very close to shore. After several hours of exposure to the pounding surf, crew members, exhausted and cold, began to be swept from the decks. In desperation, some men lashed themselves to the bowsprit in an attempt to avoid being washed overboard.
The Huron wreck was a very large loss of life. I mean, only over 90 souls lost their life in that wreck. It was also a time when the Congress was expanding our country. So there wasn't a great deal of congressional interest in expanding the Lifesaving Service. Now, at that time, trade along the coast was growing exponentially, but there weren't any lifesavers. Yes, they had put several of our life-saving stations up along the coast, but they weren't near enough, and they weren't manned during the year around. This episode changed that. It was because of this incident that Congress went back and awarded dollars to not only expand the life-saving service, but to expand the hours and the times that those people worked. Because of that incident, the chance of survival increased. Well, it was an awakening. At that point, Uncle Sam said, well, I hate to spend money for life-saving services, but because of this, we're going to have to improve our capabilities. And in so doing, it went back to Congress, and Congress awarded dollars to ensure that the people that were transiting the coast had at least some vestiges of life-saving capability. There were stations along the beach, lifeguard stations, and they were manned by the surfmen, what they were called. Their main rescue tool were actually two different components. One was a breeches buoy, which was nothing more than a cannon that shot a shell with a line on it out over the distressed vessel, hoping that someone on the vessel could get the line and pull out a heavier line that would be attached to the vessel, and then nothing more than a round inner tube-like device would be pulled out to you, and you'd get in it, and then the people on shore would pull you in. And then the other component they used was their dory or lifeboat, and that's when they actually got in the boats and physically put themselves in harm's way to row out to a vessel that was offshore and try to recover whoever was on the vessel and then get them back to shore safely.
During the summer of 2012, maritime archaeologists and graduate students from the UNC Coastal Studies Institute and East Carolina University performed a survey and archaeological assessment of the shipwreck, including a corrosion study to better understand how the ship is degrading over time. As part of the assessment, graduate students created a site plan of the USS Huron. A site plan is a detailed scaled map of the current state of the shipwreck and provides a baseline for further scientific study.
My name is Greg Stratton. I'm with the East Carolina University Program in Maritime Studies, specifically in the Underwater Archaeology Department. There's many parts to mapping a wreck. Actually, the first and biggest part is find the scale. I know this sounds weird, but you have to scale everything so that it fits on our slates. Our slates that we carry are roughly 12 by 16 inches, heavy plastic slates. And on the slate, we have taped down a performant that has a scale underneath. And then we use mylar, such as these, that we can write on underwater. Once we set all of those up, we get into the water, and you set a baseline. Baseline can be set in various parts. Your best is if you can run it down the center line of the wreck. And that way you can map both sides of the center line and give yourself a complete wreck. The Huron is great because it's mostly intact wrecks. We can run one baseline down the center line and map both sides of it in our buddy teams. It was tied off, and we had various places to tie it off, and we could split the wreck into different partitions and units for people to work on.
The Huron is home to an abundance of marine life, including large schools of fish and a variety of invertebrates that inhabit the crevices of the wreck. Marine life on the wreck changes throughout the year, yielding interesting diving conditions no matter when you visit the site. UNC Coastal Studies Institute archaeologists are interested in understanding the current state of the wreck, as well as how the wreck has degraded over time. Tom Horn, ECU graduate student in the program in Maritime Studies, is studying the corrosive potential of the USS Huron and how that might be applied to other shipwrecks around the world.
So what we're looking at, it's pretty much a corrosion study, and what we want to determine is how much the ship rusts in the winter as opposed to summer, fall, and spring. So it's a seasonal study of corrosion of this wreck. The way we do that is you drill a small hole, actually about the size of a big pen, in terms of its width, about 9 millimeters, and using a reference electrode and a platinum-tipped probe, we measure the millivolts difference between the sound iron in the ship that's still left and the seawater. And from this, we get a reading called an E-core reading. It pretty much is the potential for corrosion. And so what we're doing is we're looking at the ions diffusing through this concretion layer that is formed after 130 years. And what we're measuring is the flow of these ions through there and subsequently how much the ship is rusting. So what we want to do is we want to take this information, we want to take this corrosion potential and get a measurement called an I-core, and from that you can actually extrapolate millimeters per year loss on the shipwreck. So any wreck site with metallic objects on it is subject to corrosion, and there are actually things you can do to minimize corrosion on a wreck site. There's a cathodic protection, you can even do things like substrate manipulation, so you can get rid of scour and stuff like that. So there are remediation processes that we can go through to try and preserve this wreck site for as long as possible, because once this ship rusts away, it's gone, it's not renewable.
The USS Huron can be found off Bladen Street in Nags Head on North Carolina's Outer Banks. The town of Nags Head understands the importance of the USS Huron as a valuable cultural and natural resource.
The Huron, the wreck of the Huron, is important to the town of Nags Head because we've partnered with the state underwater archaeology branch to help preserve it for future generations. We've had folks that have gone out and marked it. It was mapped in the early 80s, and it's a pleasure to see folks out there going back and remapping it to see how it's been preserved, how it's held up underwater. It's a very dynamic area. It's right outside the surf zone, so there's a lot of things happening out there. But the town thinks it's a great asset to the whole area, and it's just another part of that cultural and historic heritage that the Outer Banks has that really draws people from all over and gives visitors a lot to do and see and look at.